Legend of the Dead, Chapter 1. Benjamin scanned the horizon over the uninterrupted expanse of sea. Nothing. To be sure, he looked out again, dissected the sea into paddocks, fenced them in, and analyzed them, one after the other. But there was nothing out there. Signor Lucena stood next to him, gripping the ship's rail. "How can 15 vessels on the open sea simply disappear?" Benjamin turned to the ship's master, standing on the half-deck above, but he made no response to Signor Lucena's question. He gazed back at the horizon. "The storm, it wasn't so bad," Signor Lucena said. "Master Crick, the rest of the fleet couldn't possibly have all gone down, could they?" "It's a sign," the boatswain said, when it was clear the ship's master was too deep in thought to respond. The other crewmen, gathered on the main deck, nodded their agreement. Benjamin looked back at the horizon. He was only 7 years old, but he didn't believe in signs. How could he, when Christians used them to justify assaulting his people? All the same, he found the stillness of the ship disconcerting, after being tossed about by gale winds for days on end. The Valk rocked slightly, with hardly any wind in her sails. The creaking of her rigging sounded no louder than the satisfied snoring of an old woman. Even the Valk's crew had left off their usual lively banter. Now they grumbled in hushed voices around the mizzenmast. Benjamin strained to hear their conversation from where he stood with Signor Lucena on the upper deck. "They've been swallowed by the Leviathan, they have," said the cook, staring at the endless expanse of sea and fog. "Nay, it's the Portuguese has got 'em. Damn thieving papists," the rigging master said. He demonstrated his conviction by spitting a mouthful of mucus onto the deck. "It be the hand of the Almighty," the ship's carpenter said, shaking his hand despondently. "He's punishing us for taking Jews on board. We took Jewish silver, and now we'll share in their damnation." Many of the crew nodded in agreement. Signor Lucena let out a muted sigh, but continued to stare out at the sea. Benjamin didn't like how Signor Lucena pretended he hadn't heard what the crew had said. Benjamin wanted to pound his fists against their lying mouths. Ignorant Dutchmen! They were as bad as the Portuguese planters in Recife, the small colony on the easternmost shore of Brazil that had been his home until the Portuguese army had expelled them a week ago. The Christians had blamed the Jewish settlers for every bad crop and sick cow. Benjamin hated their stupidity, how their fear always turned their minds to violence. He wished he could fight back, but he could tell from Signor Lucena's response to the crew's insults that fighting back would only bring trouble. Besides, he was already sure to be reprimanded for sneaking out of the passenger hold to come above. He had been yelled at by the signoras more times than he could count since they'd left Recife. As if reading his mind, Signor Lucena turned to him and said, "Go below, Benjamin. You shouldn't be up here anyway. Your sister will be worried." He went without protest below deck. Signor Lucena had negotiated for the Jews to be allowed above deck 1 hour each evening to take in the fresh air, but otherwise they were confined below in a windowless, cramped space above the large cargo hold. A few of his brethren shot Benjamin angry looks as he joined them, but most seemed just as fearful of their situation as the Dutch crew. Their anxious whispering was as irritating as the crew's bigotry. "The other ships are out there, no?" Cosme Delgado, a merchant, tried to appear hopeful. "Perhaps we have just fallen behind. You see how the fog has hovered so low after the storm." "No, we are off course," another merchant, the wealthy Isaac Israel, said. "I am sure of it. Curse the day we left Recife. Perhaps the Portuguese would not have treated us so severely had we stayed. You see how they let us depart with the Dutch after they took possession of the colony. Had they truly meant us harm, they would have forced us to remain." "With respect, Signor," Rachel Lucena said, "it was their army that let us go. Their priests are soon to follow, now that Recife is back in Portuguese hands. Better to drown at sea than to burn on a pyre to please their inquisitors." Signor Israel's wife turned sharply to Rachel Lucena. "Why does Abraham not tell us what the ship's master supposes?" "Because the ship's master has told my husband nothing," Rachel answered. "Perhaps Signor Lucena was not the best choice for our spokesman," Signor Israel suggested. "He is only a scholar, after all." "Abraham will not fail us," the timid physician Aaron Sarfati said. "Have faith." Signor Israel raised his eyebrows in surprise at Signor Sarfati's defense of Signor Lucena. Then he scowled when the physician said no more. "Faith! Bah!" A child whimpered, burying her face into her mother's hip. "Mama!" "Shh, querida. God will not abandon us." The Valk had left Recife 2 weeks earlier, one of 16 ships headed to Amsterdam. The fleet was manned by Dutch crews, although the majority of the passengers were Jews of Portuguese origin. For most of the passengers, this journey was not a return home. Amsterdam provided the Portuguese Jews safe haven from the Inquisition of their native land. But the Dutch barely tolerated the Jews. When they'd taken Recife from the Portuguese back in 1630, they encouraged the Jews to settle there to keep them out of Amsterdam. But here they were 24 years later, headed back. Benjamin had never been to Amsterdam. Like many other children of the Jewish settlers, he'd been born in Brazil. And the weeks before the fleet had set out, Rabbi Fonseca had preached to them words Benjamin would never forget. "Once again we are refugees. For our children born in Brazil, this exile from the land of their births binds them inexorably to their ancestors. Exile is more permanent than circumcision, more purifying than mikveh. There is no deeper mark of being a Jew than exile." Benjamin thought of these words as he paced the circumference of the passenger hold, ignoring the scolding looks of the mothers who'd successfully cajoled their broods to sit quietly, and the envious looks of the other children who wished they too could move about freely. He was in exile. He was a Jew. But he would not sit quietly and accept it.